Well, hello and welcome to Sunday morning coffee with Dr. Childress. Look at the size of this mug today. Oh my God, that's like a pot of coffee just in itself. So, today I'm going to be discussing the assessment protocol for the family courts, the Diagnostic Assessment Protocol. This is what I would recommend. It's very simple and it should be routinely completed in all cases of family conflict in the family courts, where a child's showing attachment pathology, a child rejecting a parent. And it's really, really quite simple. It's simply the diagnostic checklist for pathogenic parenting, which is up on my website, and the parenting practices rating scale that is up on my website. If you just complete those two checklists, you will get an accurate diagnosis of the pathology 100% of the time. So let me explain why. So here's our differential diagnosis for the pathology in the family courts. We either have the targeted parent who's abusing the child in some way, thereby creating the child's attachment pathology towards that parent, in which case we'll have physical abuse, sexual abuse, child neglect, or child psychological abuse. And we should diagnose which one of those is involved and put it on a treatment plan, protect the child, put it on a treatment plan, and fix it. Or it's a false attachment pathology created by the allied parent for secondary gain, primarily to manipulate the court's decisions on child custody in the service of spousal abuse of the targeted parent. So in that case, the diagnosis is a shared persecutory delusion and a factitious disorder imposed on the child. Either one of those or both of which will wind up in the child's psychological abuse diagnosis. And then there's the additional consideration of spouse or partner abuse, psychological, using the child as a weapon. So there's your differential diagnosis for all cases of a child rejecting a parent. So it's either the targeted parent who's doing it, or it's the allied parent who's creating a false attachment pathology. So that's what we need to work out and decide. Now, the problem that you will find in the family courts is finding the competence to assess for that. Because to be competent in the family court pathology requires competence in attachment pathology. It's a child rejecting a parent, that's attachment pathology. In persecutory delusions, because that's one of the differential diagnoses, is a persecutory delusion. So you have to be competent in the assessment for that. And that's a mental status exam of thought and perception. It's a skill set you have to learn. And then we have, you need competence in child abuse and complex trauma, since this is an assessment for child abuse one way or the other. And it's potentially a false, factitious child abuse, created by the allied parent, and a factitious attachment pathology created by the allied parent. So you have to know about factitious disorders and how those look in clinical practice. Then it's involving a narcissistic borderline dark personality, who's manipulating the courts and everybody through creating this factitious disorder. So you'll need to know about personality disorders, particularly the dark personalities, which are subclinical, by the way. And you'll need to know about family systems and family systems pathology, since this is a family conflict and you're assessing a family conflict. So the mental health people who are conducting your assessments are going to need to know a lot. Attachment, personality disorders, persecutory delusions, child abuse, family systems. They need to know a lot. And that's the problem that you're going to run into. However, Dr. Childress is competent in all those things based on my Vita. So my Vita supports competence in all of these. So attachment pathology, I have early childhood mental health specialization, persecutory delusions, 12 years on the schizophrenia project, being trained in the diagnostic assessment of persecutory delusions, child abuse and complex trauma, clinical director for a children's assessment and treatment center, For children in foster care, Child Protective Services was our primary referral source. Factitious disorders, I was trained at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles and was on medical staff at Children's Hospital of Orange County, and that's where factitious disorders show up, is typically at children's hospital kind of situations. Personality pathology, I've got background in that from my work in child abuse and complex trauma, plus I've worked with some personalities. That's not my specialty, but I have the narcissistic and borderline dark spectrum in the work with complex trauma and child abuse. And family systems, that's what I do. I was trained at Pepperdine in specialization of family systems, and that's what I've been doing for 20 years is family systems therapy. So I have all the necessary competence. So what I have done for you based on this competence that I have is that I have created for you a very simple diagnostic assessment protocol. So I have applied all that knowledge that you see right there, all that knowledge, I have applied that and come up with a very simple way that you can diagnose which one of those differentials. Is it actual targeted abuse by the targeted parent, or is it a factitious disorder and persecutory delusion? So you can do that. So here's what it is. The Diagnostic Checklist for Pathogenic Parenting and the Parenting Practices Rating Scale. So those are both up on my website. They are simply checklists for the mental health person involved to complete. They go through, answer those questions, however they've come up with their answers on those questions. They can just give us an answer to those questions. And in doing that, we will have enough information to make the differential diagnosis. So the diagnostic checklist looks at 3 symptoms. Is there a child rejecting a normal range parent? Okay, that's symptom 1, diagnostic indicator 1. Are there 5 narcissistic traits or a phobic anxiety displayed by the child? That's symptom 2. And is there a persecutory delusion displayed by the child towards a normal range parent? Now, symptom 1 is the factitious attachment pathology. Children don't reject a normal range parent. Symptom 2 is what I call the fingerprints of psychological control by a narcissistic borderline dark parent. You cannot psychologically control a child without leaving imprints, the fingerprints of your psychological control on the child's symptoms. And that's the 5 narcissistic traits in the child. Children don't have narcissistic personalities. That's the influence from a narcissistic personality, and or the phobic anxiety. When children don't develop a phobia for a mother or a father, that's the false fears being created by the pathological allied parent. So that's symptom 2. And then symptom 3 is the persecutory delusion. And it really is just that one symptom diagnosis. So if you know how to diagnose a persecutory delusion, a mental status exam of thought and perception, you can just go right on to the pathological allied parent. And in the clinical interview, you can pop the delusion out and take a look at it. That's how the diagnosis of delusional disorders is made. It's not based on history. We actually pop it out in the session and take a look at it. Okay, and the way we pop it out is a mental status exam of thought and perception. It's a sweep of the linear logical reasoning system of the brain, because we're looking for a thought disorder. So you just run down linear logical reasoning and bam, you find the thought disorder. Now, the way you run down that linear logic, that's the mental status exam of thought and perception that you have to learn, and that I know from 12 years working with schizophrenia. So it is really a one symptom diagnosis. However, you won't find the competence in the mental health system right now in the family courts to diagnose persecutory delusions like that. So they can get close. You can look at the diagnostic criteria. You can look at the situation and say, yeah, this is a false attachment pathology. And we'll talk about that in a second. Well, it's false attachment pathology, and it is the child has a fixed and false belief that they are being malevolently treated in some way. There's your persecutory delusion. A delusion is a fixed and false belief maintained despite contrary evidence, And a persecutory type is defined by the American Psychiatric Association as persecutory type, delusions that the person or someone to whom the person is close is being malevolently treated in some way. So, do we have this fixed and false belief that the child is being malevolently treated in some way? There's your persecutory delusion. That's diagnostic indicator 3. Now, what I did though is I gave you not only that symptom, I gave you 2 additional symptoms. You're going to see the attachment pathology towards a normal range parent. That's your factitious disorder. And you're going to see the psychological control symptoms of 2. In addition, I've given you 12 additional associated clinical signs. So you're going to see a whole constellation, not just the persecutory delusion, although it will be there. All of these symptoms will be there. And so that's how you have confidence in that diagnosis. If you're not competent in each one of those domains, is because I've kind of given you the symptom constellation to specifically look for, because I am competent in all those domains. So I've worked it out for you, and I'm kind of spoon feeding it to you. There you go. Just checklist, check, 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 check. And we will be able to diagnose it. Now, the other feature about this is the parenting practices rating scale. So there's 2 aspects of the assessment protocol. And this is to document whether the targeted parent is abusive range or normal range. And it's focused on the targeted parent is who we're looking at, because we're taking a look at that aspect of the diagnosis. Is the targeted parent abusing the child in some way, creating the child's attachment pathology towards that parent? If so, tell us how. And so there's 4 levels to the rating, to the checklist. And the top 2, 1s and 2, would be considered abusive range. That's clearly child abuse, documented, maybe by CPS investigation or something, or severely problematic parenting. That's just sub-threshold to being, considered abusive by CPS. So you might have stress positions or just very angry, hostile parenting or something like that. So those would be the level 1 and 2 type of concerns. Or then you have the normal range parent, which is levels 3 and 4. And level 3 is kind of, not all parents are perfect. And in fact, most of them aren't. There's a little bumpy around every parent. And so you have normal range problematic. We put it on a treatment plan and improve a little bit, but it's not abusive. It's just normal range. Or we have level 4, which is normal range and healthy. There is nothing really going on, and this is a normal, healthy parent. And so by documenting the parenting practices rating scale and just check it where the parent falls, the mental health person, it gives us the information as to whether it's a factitious attachment pathology or not. Because if it's the targeted parent who's causing it, then document that. We'll put it on a treatment plan and fix it and protect the child. If it's not the targeted parent, and then you go to the diagnostic checklist and you see a child rejecting a normal range parent, and that's how we're defining a normal range parent for the diagnostic checklist. What's a normal range parent? Well, let's get an answer to that. We're going to get parenting practices rating scale, get the mental health person to document, is this an abusive parent or a normal range parent? Now we have that information to answer diagnostic checklist question 1. If you have attachment suppression towards a normal range parent, that's a factitious attachment pathology, because children never reject a normal parent. That just doesn't happen. That's an impossible symptom, as are the other symptoms. So you also have the symptom of control, and you have the persecutory delusion. So holy cow, if you've got false attachment pathology, narcissistic traits or phobic anxiety displayed by the child, a persecutory delusion displayed by the child towards a normal range parent, 7, 5, 8 of the associated clinical signs that are predicted to show up, and the targeted parent is a normal range parent, level 3 and 4, there is only one possible cause. That's the allied parent, shared persecutory delusion, factitious disorder imposed on another. And now you've got it all documented up on symptoms. And if you have multiple mental health people who are fighting the staff splitting around borderline pathology, get them all to rate the Diagnostic Checklist and Parenting Practices rating scales so that we can see where their disagreement is. And we can make one, the child's individual therapist believes the targeted parent abused the child and has a PTSD diagnosis. Well, the family therapist or the assessing psychologist says, no, there was no abuse in this situation. There was no trauma. And so we can look, and you get the individual therapist rates the targeted parent as levels, 1 or 2, but they never did a proper assessment. They're just working off the child's reporting, which is delusional. Whereas people who actually look at the parenting of the target say, no, it's normal range. Then we have a misdiagnosis in the individual therapist. So now we can trace and come together on a single diagnosis among the treatment team by documenting the symptoms. So there it is. Okay. And it's an easy checklist. So it should be just like routinely collected by all mental health professionals. And here it is. Here, easy. The question whether the allied parent is abusive is the diagnostic checklist for pathogenic parenting. If those symptoms are not present, then no, you have some other issue going on. It's not the psychological child abuse, persecutory delusion, factitious disorder, if those symptoms are not present. If they are, yes, it is. The question is it a normal range parent? Diagnostic indicator 1. Well, is the targeted parent abusive? Parenting practices rating scale. That'll give us that answer. So with those 2 checklists, easy peasy, check, 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 you can render an accurate diagnosis of the pathology 100% of the time. So those 2 scales right there should be collected 100% of the time, just routinely. Child comes in from the family courts with attachment pathology, just diagnose it or document the symptoms on the Diagnostic Checklist Parenting Practices rating scale. Then you can do whatever you want. You can do, whatever you want, MMPIs with the parents or Roberts with the kids or whatever you want to do. This right there will give you the diagnosis. Diagnosis is a pattern match of symptoms to diagnostic criteria. And so document the symptoms up. So these checklists are available on my website. The consulting office, Dr. Childress, Dr. C.A. Childress -consulting. And you go there in the mental health professionals section. You go into the little consulting page for them, and you will see there the diagnostic checklist and the parenting practices rating scale, and you can just download them from there and give them to your mental health professional. Your mental health professional should already know this stuff. And so they should already be downloading this and doing this all the time because it's so easy. But if they're not, then just ask them to document the symptoms using the Diagnostic Checklist and Parenting Practices rating scale. Easy peasy. Just tell us what the symptoms are, and we will get an accurate diagnosis. The problem that parents have run into over the past 10 years, okay, since 2015, these have been available. Over the past 9 years, coming on 10, is that the mental health people say no. They say, no, I'm not going to complete these symptom checklists because it'll expose that they're misdiagnosing the pathology and they don't know what they're doing. Okay, so they just flat out refuse. Now, I don't care whether you agree with Dr. Childress or not. Come with reasons. Okay, look at my experience and background. Bring your Vita. And I've explained it all in detail in foundations and blogs and papers and everywhere else. So if you disagree with me, tell me why. However, I don't really care. Document the symptoms anyway, because you're being asked to. If the symptoms are not present, say no, they're not present. If they are, say yes, they are present. You are the mental health person involved. We need this mental health information, partly for continuity of care, because your clients, patients, are going to be coming to me for second opinion. And the first thing I'm going to be telling your clients on my second opinion is ask the involved mental health professional to document what the child's symptoms are with these two checklists so we have clarity on what their perception is. So please, mental health people, document the child's symptoms when you are asked. Okay, do we actually need to get a court order to get you to document child symptoms like you should be under your duty to protect obligations? If not, you can conduct a mental status exam with thought perception if you want. You can conduct a proper risk assessment for child abuse and a factitious disorder if you want. If you know how to do that, if you have the boundaries of competence and you want to assess for the core actual pathology, factitious disorder imposed on another, shared persecutory delusion, psychological child abuse, and then all the child abuse diagnoses by the targeted parent, you want to conduct that assessment, that's fine. Go ahead. Or to just get me the symptoms. And in fact, even if you do collect that, please document the symptoms anyway. There's no reason not to be using these checklists. So, step 1, document the symptoms. Step 2, make the diagnosis based on the symptoms. It is actually that simple. But the forensic psychologists are not doing that. They are refusing to conduct risk assessment for child abuse. They're refusing to document the symptoms. It's just so severely bad what they're doing. There are forensic psychologists with names who are intentionally disabling the mental health system response to the pathology for their own financial and career status gains. That's just a fact. And right now they are covering up the failed approach of forensic psychology custody evaluations. They're covering that up, and because they'll go out of business. That's the only thing they do. And if we get rid of forensic custody evaluations, which we should, and go back to diagnostic assessments over here, which we should, then they're out of business. They're out of the family courts and they have to go start working with ADHD or autism or something, or start collecting the checklist and conduct, but then they admit that they haven't done that for their entire career, which is failure and duty to protect and ethical and a lot of stuff like that. So with that, that's my Sunday coffee for today on the diagnostic assessment protocol. It is really quite simple. And we can solve this like that. The moment there's the motivation to solve it within the mental health people, within your psychologists. You have the worst psychologists imaginable. Where's your licensing boards on standard 2.04, standard 2.01, standard 9.01? The New York Blue Ribbon Commission calls forensic custody evaluations harmful to children, lack scientific legal value, and are dangerous. Where are your licensing boards protecting their citizens from these forensic custody evaluations? And holy cow, it's just so bad. The forensic psychology needs to go, and clinical psychology needs to come back. But there's not the competence in the family courts. So I'm helping you out. I'm scaffolding you up a little bit. Complete the diagnostic checklist and the parenting practices rating scale, and you will solve the situation. If you don't believe me, try it. That's all I'm saying. Just try it, and it won't work if it doesn't work. However, I bet you if you try it, your entire court problem will be solved. That's what I'm saying. Prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. Just start collecting these symptom checklists and see what happens. Just see what happens. So with that, I'm going to head out to my Sunday. Good luck, everybody, and we'll talk to you next week about some other aspect of the family court pathology.